The idea is that comic books have a problem with women is no great revelation to anyone in this room. For at least the last few decades, women have been depicted in comics as the Barbie doll proportion characters who are allergic to clothes and who often meet very graphic, grisly demises. I don't think there's ever been a time that I've walked into a comic book shop with my daughter and not seen and felt looks of confusion following her. Girls invaded the clubhouse. Did she see the sign? No girls allowed? In fact, a recent survey of comic purchasers suggested that less than 6% of all comics sold are to women. The response from the main comic companies has been overwhelmingly a snide comment and a shrug. And this is something that is not going over with a new group of fans. This presentation examines how misogyny in comics is being addressed by a group of fans, both women and men, who use technology to form communities and to move from being passive consumers of culture to more active critics of media. Today there's an active and growing group of fans, as many of you know, who are using technology to make their concerns known about the role and depiction of women in the comic arts. In 1999, Gail Simone and some of her friends compiled a list of superheroines who had been killed, empowered, or maimed. You have an updated list in front of you. She called it, and the website that sprang out of this discussion, Women in Refrigerators, referring to an incident in Green Lantern number 54, in which the hero comes home from his apartment to find that his girlfriend has been murdered by a supervillain and stuffed inside a refrigerator. Simone has always maintained that her point behind the list was to make clear that she felt if you demolish most of the characters girls like, then girls will not read comics. She opened this conversation up to mainstream comic creators as well as fans, and while several comic book creators indicated that the list caused them to, quote, pause and think about the stories they were creating, not a whole lot actually came after that pause. And part of this is due to a lack of activism on the part of fans. Primarily, since 1999, the overall strategy among dissatisfied fans has been what I refer to, with full respect to our hosts, I see as the small liberal arts college response, which is somebody's going to get a nasty letter about this. This strategy has proven to be largely ineffectual. Janelle Asselin, who is a former DC, now Disney editor, wrote her college thesis on marketing to women in comics and found 4 different ways the comic industry can adjust to increase sales to women readers. The first being better marketing towards women, then more exclusive content, then more effective distribution, and then changing the cultural perception of comics. Now, you as readers and fans may not expect every company to do all of these things all at once, but it is fair to say that it's surprising that the industry continues to alienate fans by not doing any of these things at any time. Although, to be fair, we do have to say there are exceptions to this rule. Characters like Manhunter at DC, from Mark Andriecco, Brian Michael Bendis's Jessica Jones, and of course we cannot forget Tamara Pierce's White Tiger. However, despite these exceptions, decades of inaction have made it clear that the problem cannot be fixed by relying on the industry to heal itself. With a lack of initiative or a desire to change on the part of the creators, an alternative has risen. Comic fans taking matters into their own hands. However, it takes a very specific, very certain kind of fan who has the capability of affecting that change. And to help define those characteristics of those fans who have the capability of turning from reader to activist, I drew upon David Beard and Kate Votye Beard's essay, Comics, Fans, and Convergence Culture, the Community of Readers in the Master of Kung Fu, which for those of you who may not know, was a Marvel comic book from the 1960s entitled The Master of Kung Fu. The Beards found in their study that fans wrote letters with a purpose, and they believed they could influence the direction of comics, the fate of the character, and the work of the creator. Now, as an interesting side note, I did want to mention comic creator and scholar Trina Robbins' similar work in the Wonder Woman comics fan letters. And what we find here, what I found here, and what she found here, is even more interesting because it also reveals that comic fans were not always the stereotypical boys club that we see today. Robbins points out the 1962 April issue contained letters from 2 girls and 1 boy. The May 1963 issue had letters from 5 girls, and the October 1964 letter page was all female with letters from 5 girls. Interestingly enough, and unlike the letter columns of today, these were all girls. These were all young women, and even more interestingly, they wrote to Wonder Woman herself, not to the creators, the artists, the writers, the inkers. But back to the Master of Kung Fu letter pages. The Beards came up with a set of criteria that allows one to move from casual fan to activist co-creator. They found that fans had to be literate enough to be able to measure the quality of comics, not just against other comic books, but also against so-called high culture, novels, movies, film. They found that fans must be objective enough to critically read a text that they love and understand its implication towards equality and cultural diversity. And they found that fans must be capable of engaging each other and the editorial staff with both passion but respect, which is not the easiest thing to do in the age of internet discussion boards. Note, however, these are not characteristics that we and the popular media associate with an old school comic book fan. However, the recent mainstreaming of graphic novels to a great extent has opened up in a small way the genre to a new group of fans who meet these qualifications and who are interested in finding like-minded and like-equipped readers. These new, more empowered fans identify with a book or a character for them and for the others who share their taste. Gives them a sense of identity and a sense of place within the community. What we're talking about here is a sense of emotional connection. The readers interact with each other online, and from this interaction, a web of like-minded members is formed. And then through this web of influence, fans come to believe that through their community's actions, they can change, they can influence the comic books, the companies, the heroes, and the stories being told. However, it's not a one-way street. The comic companies still have a place and a responsibility in these communities. For the critics to stay active and exist, there has to be some gain that they feel is being made from the work of their community. Scholars in media studies talk about uses and gratifications, and that's really what we're talking about here. We, active fans, need to feel that we are consuming our media for not just individual psychological and social purposes, but there is a bigger agenda, that there is a response from the companies that are producing the products that we consume. This active dialogic response has been called convergence culture by Henry Jenkins. And Jenkins calls this convergence culture because, opposed to an older media model in which it's a one-way street, the media company produces a text and the reader passively consumes it. In this way, we're replacing the old model with the convergence of the creations of the corporation along with the creations of the fans across multiple medias. It becomes harder in these communities, as Kate pointed out, to separate the line that marks producer and consumer of media text. For example, the Beards pointed out CBS's Survivor, in which they said that there is the show is a media powerhouse, but part of the reason that it's a media powerhouse is because the fans have created a mountain of texts relating to, interrogating, expanding on the show's culture. Similarly, fans of Harry Potter have created a vibrant fan culture, which entails not just buying and consuming the books, but also extending the adventures, as some of you have done, in fan-created fiction, video, crafts, and art. However, the difference being comics have been resistant to this loosening of control, and I would suggest this is to their detriment. In a convergence culture, the production of these fans advance the agendas of the corporation. That is to say, readers who are passionately involved with the product, they find a home in comics, they sell more comics, they bring more people into the culture because more fans are recruited, and in this way the fans' mostly free labor advances the success of the entire comic economic eco-structure. So, now that the boring stuff's out of the way, now that we've talked about technology and convergence culture, and now that we have noted that technology more than anything has made it easier for like-minded and like-equipped fans to find each other, I'd just like to talk real briefly about three hubs of these, that showcase the valuable work that's being presented and still largely ignored by mainstream creators, by these highly involved communities. The saddest one is first, girlwonder.org, which some of you may remember. It seems sadly to be no more. But while active, I thought it was fantastic, and it really provided a blueprint, I think, for a lot of people who decided that they wanted to be more involved fans. It employed columnists and fans who kept track of portrayals of female characters. It recommended comics featuring strong female characters and collected and archived academic papers on the subject of women in comics. And they had a future plan which involved a print imprint as well as a fund to help female creators find their way to comic conventions to find more fans. More contemporarily, the Hawkeye Initiative, as many of you know, is a satirical Tumblr page that enables fans to comment directly on the depiction and treatment of female characters in comic books. And what happens here basically is that fans redraw positions held by female characters that they find ludicrous or hypersexual, and they replace Hawkeye with it. Gail Simone famously called it the best thing in the history of historical anything ever in the universe or elsewhere. And it's fun, but also part of the agenda is to make clear the fact that we see these female characters in these ludicrous poses so many times that we become desensitized to it, and it seems like the norm. And by switching in Hawkeye, we understand how ludicrous it is. This one is my favorite. Finally, the last and I think most subtle and I'd say most effective site of fan resistance to the comic culture of misogyny I want to mention today is Project Rooftop. This started in February 2006 when Dean Tripp and Chris Arnott started the site as a way to showcase and improve costume design in the industry. I think that by allowing both fans and professional artists to redesign costumes, it's very effective. It's also very effective because Project Rooftop typically never directly addresses misogyny in costume designs. Although, upon looking at the redesigns, we can see that the hypersexuality of the costumes is something that's very much on their minds. We can see a contemporary representation of Wonder Woman on the left, and then the fan reimagination of her costume on the right. And Power Girl, as you might guess, the contemporary representation is on the left. The fan redesign is on the right. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but a sampling of what I feel are the best examples of fan pushback. I think that probably, if this continues, a change will come, but that change will take as much time as it took for comic companies to push away the young women who took the time to write Wonder Woman in 1964. Trina Robbins again said in an interview that it took 30 years for comic companies to paint themselves in the corner they're in now. They didn't care the books didn't sell women because they felt they had a never-ending supply of young guys. As you probably guessed, I'm a pretty big nerd. And I'm critiquing this culture from a place of both love and of great disappointment. Comics may be pure fantasy, but I think it's really important to remember that fantasy in very real ways affects how we see our reality. And these cartoon women with their impossible and disturbing bodies behind their masks and inside their stripper shoes represent the sisters, mothers, and daughters who make up more than half of our population. And thankfully, fans are beginning to resist the notion